President Trump meeting today with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. We just heard them speak there in the Oval Office in addition to a CBS News special report talking everything from tariffs to direct talks, it sounds like, between the U.S. and Iran this weekend. For more, let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, what were your top lines and takeaways from this Oval Office spray, as they say?
Yeah, the big news, as you mentioned, is President Trump announcing that there would be direct talks with Iran on Saturday, potentially about their nuclear capabilities. Trump was asked, trying to get more details on there and said that, quote, officials of almost the highest level will be talking to them. But it's notable that he said direct talks in particular, no intermediary countries involved, directly talking to Iran this Saturday. Netanyahu on tariffs told President Trump, as we have known, that they have eliminated their trade deficit with the United States and their trade barriers, potential regulations when it comes to food or technology, and that Israel could, quote, be a model for other countries looking to negotiate with President Trump. Interestingly enough, from what I heard, President Trump did not say if he would remove the tariffs on Israel, despite what seemed as their good faith measure. That's something to be watching in the next couple of days. And also, President Trump was asked, are these tariffs going to be permanent? Are you open to negotiations, given the mixed signals we're hearing from White House officials in the most recent days? And Trump seemed to indicate that both options are available, specifically, though, when it comes to the European Union, who offered to eliminate their taxes on cars imported from the United States. President Trump was asked if that's a good enough move, and he said, no, it is not.
Let's talk a little bit more about the tariffs between the U.S. and Israel. We've had a trade agreement with them since 1985. Netanyahu saying that they dropped their 17% tariffs against U.S. imports over the weekend. The president not committing to dropping the 17% reciprocal tariff against Israel. But what are the likely next steps, and what do we know? I know that, for example, in 2022, some of the biggest these are U.S. exports to Israel, stone, glass, metals. Exports from Israel to the U.S. in 2023 included diamonds, integrated circuits, and broadcasting equipment.
Yeah, the thought is it could be contingent as well on the other big topic on President Trump's mind when it comes to Israel, and that is what is happening in Gaza. And we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu that said that he and Steve Witkoff, Trump's assigned special envoy in the Middle East, are working on another hostage deal to get that done. They talked about neighboring countries that would accept Palestinians should they choose to go there. But you're right in that President Trump did not say if he would remove the tariffs. I see it as an indication that he wants to see where this hostage deal goes first. But Netanyahu certainly is making that first step by saying they are, quote, eliminating outright the trade deficit between the U.S. and Israel.
Aaron, what did the president say about the military budget as he and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency work to cut down on federal costs? And what did the defense secretary say about the situation with the Houthi rebels in Yemen?
Yeah, primarily when it comes to the Houthis, Secretary Hegseth said that they would not stop, that they would be relentless, and wanted to send a message to Iran to no longer remotely support the Houthis. So that's what I heard from that.
Okay, yes, and we did hear the president talk about increasing the defense budget of our military. Aaron, stay with us if you can, because I want to bring in Courtney Kealy right now. Courtney is a Middle Eastern reporter and expert for us for CBS News. She joins us now in Studio 57. Tell me the significance of these direct talks Saturday between the United States and Iran.
Well, with all the noise at this semi-presser in the Oval Office, not an official presser, it was a real standout when President Trump said direct talks with Iran starting Sunday. And then somebody followed up with the question and said, did you say direct? Because there's a question of whether it was indirect or direct, and that's been going back and forth. And Trump said direct. Trump said high level. And before he said this, Netanyahu said he would like to see that Trump and Netanyahu, they had spoken about Iran. Netanyahu has always said they'd like to see what's a Libyan model, which means the complete elimination of a nuclear program. That would be what happened in Libya, but that's very unlikely to be seen in Iran. All the experts, and including news reports coming out of Iran, is that's very unlikely that Iran would dismantle their nuclear program. Experts have said that they're pretty much ready to use nuclear energy for a nuclear bomb. And they've already kind of held that. It's almost like not turning on the keys, not manufacturing one, or if they do, it's deep in the bunkers. There's been a military buildup in the region, especially on this island called Diego Garcia, that many people have never heard about but are hearing recently since the attacks on the Houthis by the U.S. Diego Garcia is in the Indian Ocean. And we have, the U.S. does B-2 bombers there. They've satellite imagery have counted about 6. There are THAAD battery missiles in Israel, defensive missile program to keep missiles from flying into Iran. So all these movements happening in case to do with the Houthis, to do with Hamas, but also Iran. So we have to see, and I've been reading, checking out to texting sources in Iran saying, what are they saying in real time? What are we going to hear? Now, I want to tell you something really interesting that I've been looking into recently. During President Trump's first term, he eliminated the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard force, Qasem Soleimani. And according to Iranians that would like to see an end to the regime and the Ayatollah, and they see them less as clerics now, they see them as oligarchs, people who have benefited off the system like an Assad did in Syria. They want them out, and they actually call, some people in Tehran refer to Netanyahu as Uncle Benny, and some people want to see Trump doing something. So there's not, I mean, it could raise nationalism in Iran, but there are people that need change in Iran that want to see the execution stop and the human rights abuse stop. So we have to see how he's going to square all this in these opening remarks.
How is President Trump's posture toward Iran different from previous administrations?
Like I said, he's liked. He's liked by the average person in Iran because he did something against the regime when he took out Qasem Soleimani during his first term. That was a bold missile strike on him when he was in Iraq. Qasem Soleimani really squired himself around the Middle East and had a very prominent Instagram profile. It was sort of like, I'm here, I'm head of all Quds, and I can go anywhere I want in the Middle East, until Trump took him out. And it was very, very a dangerous move to see what the retaliation was. Retaliation didn't come. Now we've seen Iran evolved in this back and forth since the Hamas massacre, since the Israeli-Hamas war. And we've seen in the last year or so, we've seen Israel launch a strike. We've seen Iran launch a strike and having those missiles shot out of the air. They were deliberate. The first time last spring, they waited 10 days, sort of let all the allies of Israel get ready and in place to shoot those missiles out of the sky. And then there was one Friday night in the fall that wasn't as big. It was sort of like, we're here, we're watching you, we're prepared. President Trump has come in, like I said, he's really upped an arsenal of military equipment, everything from aircraft carriers to bombers to battery pack missile defense systems in Israel and in this island of Diego Garcia. So they're ready in defense, but he's also going in the offense to talk to top officials. Will it be the Grand Ayatollah? I'm not sure.
What did you hear in terms of ceasefire negotiations in this conversation?
I heard that Steve Witkoff is on it. I heard that Prime Minister Netanyahu, clearly speaking to his own country, said the evil of Hamas has to be eradicated. That means really that he's not ready to stop those military operations against Hamas, which does make a ceasefire harder to agree upon, but also that he wants to see the living hostages out. President Trump has said he wants to see Idan Alexander out, the Israeli-American out. It's being parsed as a number game, which is really hard to take when you know it's lives. Right. We have to see what Witkoff comes up with. Macron was meeting with both Egypt and Jordan. They all got on a call with Trump today before the Netanyahu meeting. So it's a full press, court press going on in a lot of diplomatic circles, Arab, European, and U.S. and Israel directly.
Okay, Courtney Kealy, thank you so much. Let's go back to Aaron Navarro. Aaron, what more can you tell us about that call? Per a Jordanian official, the president spoke with Emmanuel Macron, Sisi, Abdullah ahead of this meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, this call was organized by French President Macron, where they really advocated to Trump when it comes to humanitarian aid, getting into Gaza, pushing for a ceasefire, just generally advocating for the Palestinians impacted by the Israeli military strikes. They also talked to Trump about creating, quote, conditions and mobilizing international efforts to, quote, end the suffering of the Palestinian people and said that they would remain in close coordination in the coming days. And one other thing, I'm just reading as Trump is talking, he was asked if he was going to take off that 17% tariff on Israel. He said, quote, maybe, maybe not, and said that they were talking about a whole new trade deal between the U.S. and one of its closest allies, Israel.
Aaron, for anybody who might just be joining us, can you please give a recap of some of the top lines of what we heard from President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu there in the Oval Office?
Yeah, the biggest thing is Trump announcing that on Saturday the U.S. will be having, quote, direct talks with Iran, potentially about their nuclear capabilities. Notable that it is direct. There are no intermediary countries kind of facilitating that conversation this upcoming weekend. On tariffs, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he told President Trump they will eliminate the trade deficit between Israel and the U.S. in addition to trade barriers. And also, Netanyahu announced that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy in the Middle East, is working with Israel on a new hostage deal as it relates to Gaza and Israel.
Aaron, we have obviously seen the markets tumble, make some gains. It's been quite a roller coaster ride for all three major United States indexes. What can you tell us about developments over the weekend in terms of the president's tariffs policies and whether there's any indication that there could be any sort of backing off or negotiation at play behind the scenes?
Well, just now in the Oval Office, President Trump was asked if he could see any pause on tariffs as it relates to certain countries. He said he could not see that. In general, White House officials and the president in just the past 24 hours have signaled they are open to negotiations with other countries. The U.S. Trade Representative said over 50 countries have already reached out to begin negotiations with the U.S. You're seeing some already say they're not going to retaliate with their own tariffs, such as Bangladesh and India. Trump said this morning, quote, tough but fair parameters are being set. But you saw him just now and are seeing him in the Oval Office really stand by his move on tariffs, said that, quote, we have one shot at this. And his goal to bring back manufacturing back to the U.S., which is certainly a bet just given the time it could take and what we're seeing out of China right now in their own response of reciprocal tariffs.
Let's talk about that, because we know that the president in the beginning of his second term hit China with tariffs on April 2nd, the day he called Liberation Day in America, more tariffs on top. China did not sort of bend over like maybe some experts were thinking or economists were predicting. Instead, China doubled down and said, OK, we'll see your tariff. We'll give you a reciprocal tariff of 34%. That, of course, as we saw, sent the stock markets tumbling toward the end of last week. And then we saw today the president doubling down and saying if China doesn't remove that reciprocal tariff, that he would place an additional 50% tariff. So I believe a few hours ago, you told me that would be a 104% tariff that China could potentially be looking at.
That's right. So that includes the 50%, which Trump said if China does not back down from their own response of tariffs, that he would implement that starting tomorrow, Tuesday. Now, that 50% is on top of a 20% tariff he applied on China, blaming them for trafficking when it comes to fentanyl, as well as the 34% tariffs that he announced last Wednesday on what the White House called Liberation Day. And you're right that Chinese officials are not backing down. Even leading up to last Wednesday, you saw Chinese officials say if it's a trade war the U.S. wants, it is one that China will not back down from. But certainly it's China and the European Union that Trump has really showed his gripes with when it comes to the trade deficit as kind of the impetus of this tariff war. And we're seeing him take escalatory actions potentially in the next 24 hours.
Okay, Aaron Navarro, thank you so much for all of your reporting there at the White House. We appreciate it.